What is your purpose here? How many of you are there?
Welcome to Voyage of the Geek for another week. This episode is episode 2 of our 3-episode exploration into the 1959 sci-fi classic Journey to the Center of the Earth. And in this episode, joining me as always, Rik Legarto, Tom Magill, Dan Miller. My name's Dave Scotland. And in this episode, we're going to spend a bit of time on the Lost Sofa with Rik Legarto. We're also going to be exposed to Just the Tip with Tom Magill. But without any further ado, let's jump straight in to the Lost Sofa.
There is something going down, and I can feel it.
At last, welcome to you. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
I can feel it. There is something going down, and I can feel it.
Hola, everyone. Welcome to the Lost Sofa. For those of you new to the rebooted Voyage of the Geek, Lost Sofa is kind of into the writer's room and beyond, where we talk about the writers and the writing and how that comes out in the wash in the film. All right. This time we're looking at Journey to the Center of the Earth. This, as you may well know, and you should know if you don't, go slap yourself, is Jules Verne, one of his most famous stories. It belongs to his major work, The Extraordinary Journeys, which is more than 60 adventure novels, including things like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Around the World in 80 Days, and, of course, our Journey to the Center of the Earth. It's also, along with the novels I just mentioned, it's Journey to the Center of the Earth is one that's had a few films made for it. In fact, it seems every time.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
It's more than half a dozen. Yeah?
Yeah.
It'd be about 7 that I
TV
can count.
shows, cartoons.
Yeah.
To be fair, if you make a film about space, how many films about space are there? At the moment
But
you go
this
into
is
the center of the
story.
Earth.
I'm talking about a specific.
Well, how many stories can there be about going to the center of the Earth? It's always going to be caves.
But
It's always going to be
based on the Jules Verne novel, though. I mean, like
a
every
lot of them.
some of them
so
are
far.
loose,
They're so loosely,
but they're
strayed,
still
yeah.
the same main character and the same Arnie's leaving the path with the 3 strokes, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities in there. But you're right, like it's more than just a genre. It's the story keeps getting imagined a lot. It's got to hold some kind of record. There's not a yeah.
And anyway, so looking at that, the story was written. Oh, I've forgotten.
1865.
Yes, that's right.
Almost 100 years before
Yeah.
this film was made. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's an interesting trip there. One of the writers was Walter Reich. He was an Austrian writer. Did I pronounce that right, Tom?
Reich, yeah.
Reich. There you go.
The screenplay writers, you mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the screenplay writers. Walter was an Austrian. He started out in 1918, so he's sort of he actually wrote this at the end of his career, and he grew up writing screenplays and stage plays in Austria and Germany. Like many other artists, it was time to kind of run out of dodge as the Nazis came to power. Unfortunately, Walter, not having the gift of hindsight, thought, if I just go across the border to back to my homeland, Austria, I'll be safe.
Perfect.
Turns out he needed to go a little bit further. So he ended up in London, and that's kind of where his Hollywood connections start to be made. Before then, it was mainly German films, which mind you, Germany had a great film industry up to this point, so it's not like he was in the backwaters. He was actually a very successful script writer. So going back to that, he ends up working for MGM for a while, and this is interesting, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, and I'll show you this connection, is in MGM, his main job was story construction, solving continuity problems, providing narrative, which is kind of like, did the script already have narrative? But obviously not. In inventing characters and making relationships between characters plausible and compelling. So basically it was his job to go in to a bare bones script and turn it into something decent and provide some meat.
So a lot of that dynamic that we saw between Carla and the professor might have come straight out of his mind.
Yes, and he was actually used to primarily writing rom-coms, musicals, less actiony titles, basically. So you can see where Pat Boone's singing and stuff comes naturally in. But yeah, that particularly that dialogue between the professor.
Do you know why there were two scriptwriters? Like, did one take over from the other, or was it a collaboration?
No, it was a collaboration, and I will get to that in a minute. Thank you, young Tom.
Well, that's pretty interesting because we when talking with Tom, who's just recently read the book, that's the things that they added. So he must have taken that and just sort of, fleshed it out a little bit. And
basically because the original novel, while great, probably is a bit dry for film.
Yeah, probably wouldn't work so well for
No,
film.
it wouldn't work. It's really just a journey about a young person.
An internal
turning into
monologue.
turning into an adult and getting over his fears. And there's only 3 characters in the whole.
Yeah, so
I can see he's got 106 writing credits.
he's
That's prolific.
yeah, he was he did a lot. And also during this period, he did a bit of work with Billy Wilder, who's a really famous old.
Yeah, that name rings a bell.
Billy Wilder is responsible for a whole bunch of, I guess, golden age Hollywood films, including Sunset Boulevard and a whole bunch. That's just one that comes to mind, but there's a whole bunch. He was very quite important in the golden age of Hollywood. Anyway, all the other thing that Walter was apparently known for was tailoring his scripts to suit a specific star. So in this case, was moulding it around Pat Boone.
Yeah.
I'm sure he
was the draw card, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't he first on the billing before James Mason?
I think so. I believe it.
I think he is.
It's similar to the Magnificent Seven with there was a young heartthrob actor that played the sort of Mexican member of the Magnificent Seven. He was the billboard guy. He was, but he was a young and upcoming. He was a singer, I think.
And for many years, it caused a bit of confusion for me. For many years, I always associated the name Pat Boone
With the old boy.
with James Mason's face. I always thought that was Pat Boone until I did the research for this show and I realized that he's the younger guy. I always thought,
Yeah, Pat Boone was a bit of, I guess, to make the parallel to 2020, Lady Gaga of his time, in a sense, the pop star that could also translate to film.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Did everyone see the hilarious link that he put on? Was it or was it you?
no, it's Dan.
No,
The-
I
Put it on Discord, and it was a Pat Boone version of Enter the Sandman.
Sandman.
Wasn't
Yeah,
it?
Metallica into the Sandman.
Fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
But
It's
Pat
a-
Boone had a time where he did a lot of those things.
It was awesome.
He did.
And did you bring up Richard Cheese?
He's the real live Richard Cheese.
If you know that lounge room style jazz.
Crooner.
Yeah.
It was a crooner version, a Pat
Yeah.
Boone crooner version of Into the Sandman. I thought
Yeah,
it was
it was great.
classic.
Yeah, it was great.
Even when he breaks down into the spoken word part of it, you can hear the girl's voice in the background.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've got Walter Reich. He did basically Journey of Century Earth during his tenure at 20th Century Fox, I believe. This was a bit of a change for him because he was no longer doing the musicals and the rom-coms and was working on their more action-y titles. But he brought his sensibilities, which is what we see in Journey of Century of the Earth. Anyway, moving right along, we then get Charles Brackett. He was an American. And Charles Brackett is well known for having one of the longest, most successful writing partnerships with Billy Wilder. There's a connection between him and Walter, the Billy Wilder connection.
What's Billy Wilder writing?
Comedy, isn't it? Mostly.
Niagara, Sunset Boulevard. Trying to remember. Actually, Charles.
He's got The Apartment, Some Like It Hot, Sabrina, Sunset Boulevard. So very accomplished. He's a very accomplished writer. And when you look at his filmography, it's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So Charles Brackett with this Billy Wilder, they were actually dubbed by Life magazine as the happiest couple in Hollywood. And Walter was the kind of the quieter of the pair. And anyway, and that actually endured for about 20 years, that partnership, and they came up with heaps of films. And that's one of the connections he has with Walter, which he writes Journey to the Centre of the Earth with.
I can see on their filmography that there's a lot of films that they're both obviously writing on. They're the same film.
Yep. Old Charles and Walter ended up, after Charles stopped working with Billy Wilder, he started working with Walter.
Okay.
And Journey to the Centre of the Earth is one of the things their most famous collaboration. So you can kind of see the, I guess,
influence.
Yeah. And they had some interesting ideas about this film, which kind of cracks me up. Where were we? In my paper notes. Yes. The Charles Brackett said, he's discussing Journey to the Centre of the Earth here. Our picture describes action and events with not the slightest shadow of Freud. The serious thing about Jules Verne is that all he does is tell a story and exciting episodes, but his stories have always pushed man a little closer towards the unknown. What we've tried to do is retell the story in the best way of all, in the Verne vernacular. So
what does he mean by no Freud?
It means Freud. It means lots of Freud.
What do you mean?
Well, by bringing attention to the fact that there's not any in it.
The book has those Freudian undertones. The journey from
right.
boyhood to manhood
Almost
has to go
sarcasm.
through a womb and a rebirth.
Oh, okay. All right, so these guys were like, well, that's later shit. Get rid of that.
basically, yes. Thank you, Tom, for making that connection, and thank you, Dan, for coming up to my conclusion. Okay, job done. See you guys next time. But that's
10 minutes are up.
That's exactly it. This is they've taken a story, and we see it happen now. Let's Hollywood the fuck out of it to make it successful and palatable, and that's exactly what they've done. And I like the way that Brackett puts it, not a shadow of Freud. Brackett called the original story a delightful book written for young people. We simply couldn't have any solemnity about it. I've wanted very much to do this, to do this at the time. I'm tired of all these films based on thoughts at the back of sick minds. So Brackett had some very strong ideas. I think he was very much... mainstream commercialism and get rid of all this crazy navel gazing. And I read somewhere, because I thought, what does he mean, the thoughts at the back of sick minds? And I'm not 100% sure, but from some of my research, I think he was alluding to some of the horror films that were coming out at the time.
Oh, yeah.
The late 50s and 60s. And so some argue that he was just, referring to that and how that's sick and twisted.
Like trying to hold on to an earlier time, sensibility. We see that a lot, don't we, in iterations of generation through art forms where you judge the new wave as not worthy.
Exactly.
Not proper.
Yeah.
And that's probably what's going on here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or another one was what Tom was talking about, getting rid of that sort of Freudian subtext, the deeper, more meaningful themes behind films. Either way, he was reacting against the new wave of films. and just made a nice romp, a
That's
good
a very
action romp.
successful. It was a very commercially successful
Yeah,
film.
Walter and
very
Charles had quite a successful partnership at 20th Century Fox, and a lot of it, obviously, Charles Brackett was very good, and Walter brought that musical and dialogue character snazziness, which really helped.
'Cause you would see that the writers of any generation would have to try to fit into what's going on in cinema at the time, and I think that's a fascinating. You'd love to be a fly on the wall in those writing discussions where, in one end goes the premise, sometimes pre-written by a novel or something like that, and then out the other end is the thing that gets ultimately turned into a film, and what happens in between would be fascinating, wouldn't it? Those discussions, because part of those discussions could be anything from, well, the producer's got a cousin and she's always wanted to be an actress.
Yeah.
And you got to work that shit in.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the main actor is a fuckwit and he wants to be able to do. And what's the famous thing in the Death of Superman Begins where the producer just had to have a
spider.
giant spider.
had to be in there,
And the 7 writers for Gladiator because Russell Crowe wanted to have so much say in that process. So that's that writing room that you'd love to be privy to.
When Pat Boone, because he's a very devout Christian and motivational speaker, and when he married at 19, his 19-year-old girlfriend, and when he got into film businesses, one of his criteria was that there shouldn't be any kissing. And how do you make films? Because most films have a love story in there. And so when the first film that he did where he actually had to kiss a woman, he had to go back and to ask for permission. I have to talk to my wife first, get her to okay it. So I can give a subtle little kiss on the lips or on the cheek somewhere.
Yeah, Pat Boone was quite strict, and in my research,
Or is he's still alive?
Is he still alive?
I think
Sorry,
as far as
Pat.
I know,
Yes.
yes.
Holy shit.
Let me just check.
Apologies,
I checked.
Pat.
It's got to be
Still alive.
90, mid-90s.
85,
Good on you, Pat.
So he was only
Yeah.
a kid in this. He was only, 19 in this, 20.
20, something like that. Yeah.
And a speculation that he despite because this was hugely successful at the time, and despite the ease that he could just throw a song into a science fiction, anywhere. Because it's science fiction. There's always a moment for a song. It's an adventure.
We should have more of those.
I think that was a jarring thing for me. Like
Yeah.
to hear people breaking into song in a science fiction film is not common. That is not a common thing of any genre, of any age. Like you think about the movies we've covered in the past, those old school. What's the?
I say when the Ewoks did it in The Return of the Jedi, everybody still hates them for it.
I stand corrected. You're right. The
I'm
Ewoks
thinking-
brought it back.
Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
Oh, there it worked because they turned that into a musical.
That was a musical to start with, wasn't
No, it was a film.
I thought it was a musical before it became a film.
No, it was a
No, it
film.
used to be a film.
Was it first?
The old black and white movie.
Yeah.
Is that he was a little uncomfortable with the science fiction genre.
Because of the Lord.
Yeah, it was a little bit out there, and he wasn't quite comfortable.
Well, there's ancient
It's the only
societies.
sci-fi
Ancient
film he
societies
did.
that predate the
That's-
Lord.
That's why they speculation is that he just wasn't quite comfortable.
But he, in
Doing that
hindsight,
genre.
also says it's probably the best film I ever made.
Yeah,
Well, they weren't afraid to be throwing about the words heathen
yeah.
Ethan Alterstone. yes.
into this film.
Yeah.
Maybe he had something to do with that.
And also science fiction, you have to think in 1950s and 60s, just as it is now, it's always pushing the envelope.
That's right.
Asking the what ifs.
He says a prayer in this, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And the professor has to correct him because he says, Lord of the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, that's right. He wants to generalize it or
And
something.
then the professor corrects him and says, maybe you should. Lord of the universe, I think is how he corrected it. I never noticed it. Yeah, you're right.
So, yeah, that's one of the speculation that he just wasn't that comfortable with this new weird genre. Anyway, so, so you can kind of see that these influences, the musical influences, the Pat Boone influences, let's take an interesting story. It's not very commercial and turn it into a Hollywood blockbuster. We've got, I've quoted Charles Brackett. I'm going to quote our Austrian friend Walter here. I had written a lot of science fiction for magazines, and Charles Brackett knew about that. They also knew that I'd written magazine articles on Jules Verne. I'd studied Jules Verne and always wanted to write his biography, but I never got around to it. When they brought the Jules Verne novel from his estate and assigned me, I was delighted. The master's work, though a beautiful basic idea, went in 1,000 directions and never achieved a real constructive roundness. With the exception of the basic idea, there is very little of the novel left in the film. I invented a lot of the new characters. The Pat Boone part, the part of the professor's wife, which is Carla, because she does become his wife eventually.
Well, you made Professor Good books, I think. Yeah.
And the part of the villain, and the fact that it all played in Scotland.
Yes.
So,
although they had good reasons to do so at the time, because when Jules Verne wrote it, in the book they're Germans, because obviously they're the best at what they do. But then in the 60s, when this
after World War II,
when turned out the Germans aren't quite as
aren't quite as marketable as they once
when
were.
German Shepherds became Alsatians.
I thought it was nice that a Frenchman wrote a book where the Germans are the anyway. So at the time in the 60s, Scotland was probably the foremost people in geology. And so
that's
that's
true.
why
A lot of
they changed to
geology
set
was
that
up in
into
Scotland.
Yeah, they
Edinburgh.
punch above their weight with the sciences.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But Pat Boone was in a lot of those. Bonnie Prince Charlie pouncing about the Highlands and singing a song in a beret.
I just think he
and
liked
a
wearing a
kilt.
dress.
He seemed to be, that was like his pet genre. There was certainly a lot of films associated with Pat Boone and a lot of those biscuit tin visuals of the Scottish Highland noble from a lot of his films. They still ring true today, even though they have no bearing in reality whatsoever.
So now we get to, where was I? We've talked about Jules and Charles and Walter. Yes. The little mini segment I like to call Smash the Patriarchy. I think this film does pretty good, actually.
Yep.
I was quite surprised when I saw it that they actually bring up, I was actually speaking to Dan about this earlier in the week, that she gives pretty good. Like, we have Charles Mason, you can't do that, you're a woman.
Yep.
And she's not taking any of that crap.
Yep.
For 1959, I was actually quite impressed with that.
Only one point in the movie where she has to trip over a rope and has to be saved by the men.
Yeah.
It's the only standout moment.
And
And in fact, it's her that is suspicious of the direction that was changed and goes back and in the face of being told not
her
to
and the other female.
dawdle and stuff like
The
that.
other female, Gertrude, was also suspicious.
Yes.
It must not
And I
be
like
her.
how they she even played the female card.
Yeah.
So they said, you can't come because you're a useless woman. She's no.
Yeah.
But then when she has to shoot
Yes. I'm a girl.
then she immediately plays it.
Which is so,
And that's fine.
Which is so 2020.
And that's cool because she's just like,
What do you mean we have to share the bill?
yeah. I thought that was cool. That
I want equal pay, but I'm not touching that cockroach. It's actually quite progressive for its time, surprisingly.
Very.
So.
One thing that I thought was weird in the last one that we did was what was the last one?
The last film.
Yeah, last film.
It was only a couple of weeks ago. It feels like a lifetime. It was at least
This Island
a
Earth.
coronavirus ago.
This Island Earth. The actress had super tight pants on, right?
Yeah.
So she was being all hot and attractive, tight that she couldn't move.
That's right.
Meanwhile, Carla has kind of the opposite. She's got the biggest, rug of a dress that's made out of like 15 layers or something or other.
Yep.
She does turn a bit busty at the end.
Yeah.
When they're down to their rags and all
For
wet.
some reason, the
From the
professor asked her to take her bra off.
Yes.
Oh yeah, because she's wearing
Her
not a
stays.
bra.
It's a
but
corset.
her- yeah, it's a corset.
She's wearing a
Which is
corset.
Some
very
wooden
tight.
contraption of
Because this is the
buckles.
I think it serves two purposes. It keeps the svelte figure, but also presses up.
It lifts.
Because
lifts and squeezes.
Because this is the very, very late Victorian era, or maybe even Edwardian era, and there was actually a lot of the early feminists and suffragettes were saying women.
Yep.
The corset is stopping women from doing things because they can't breathe properly. They can only breathe shallow breath because of the corset. And so he's actually inadvertently going, take off that restrictive garment for completely for pragmatic purposes.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that they made a point of it. Like screen time is expensive.
Yeah.
And they made a point of making a whole thing about her, and the duck had to bring it back, and all the whole thing. Someone tied the bloody corset to the duck.
I'm the same as you. It's like that's interesting that all that stuff.
Someone made a point of it. I don't know who it was, but somebody in that production decided to make a point of that.
I'd say
whole
it's a
good choice.
thing.
I'd say it's Walter's stuff dynamic between characters that he's trying to
She
play
was
around
sort of the
with.
moral center to the journey. I think realistically you could walk away thinking that she was sort of in charge, without wearing the stripes.
Yeah.
That's what I liked about it, is that they didn't let one of the two dominate each other.
No.
They went back and forward and they pushed and shoved, and it was balanced.
Yeah.
which was cool.
She was the one writing the journal for the whole time.
True.
And at some point, Alec gets lost, and then they think that he died, and so he renames the expedition in Alec's honor to instead of the Lindenberg expedition, they call it the McEwen expedition.
Yeah.
And then he forgets all about it, and she
continues
She
on.
continues in the note to always call it the McEwen expedition, and he pulls her up on it later on.
Yeah, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Why are you doing this?
I think he even says, your very appearance is an affront. He's sort of in his toffee way, he's losing his shit. He's fed up being
And then she kind of loses a little bit of she loses her cool later on in the thing.
Yeah.
She says, "All right, well, I'm fucking leaving."
That's right. And he
Fuck
says,
you.
Well, I'll call you a taxi, shall I?
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh."
And I think that was a cool moment. It was a cool moment that she laughed at her own shenanigans and stuff.
That's what I said. It's balanced. They didn't let one of the two.
I think it was well written.
Too much ahead.
It's easy to
you know?
forget that was all written.
Yeah, true.
That was all in.
There was no ad lib going on in those days. Film
these
was
guys
way
who we're
too
talking about.
expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. Which brings me to some interesting script business. Oh, don't tell me I've forgotten some of my pieces of paper. Pooh. There's a section where Alec McEwen's wondering if she's going to pull out. And he says, I wonder if Madame Göteborg will change her mind at last moment. And James Mason's, you make my mouth water. and Alex says, oh, Hans is tying the rope on her. And Charles Mason responds with the, what if I can persuade him to cut it?
Yeah.
So he's not happy about having her from the very beginning.
Oh, no, not at all.
And that kind of sets up that relationship sort of in his very toffee polite way. He really doesn't want her there.
Sadly, they don't really show that progressing, because at the end, they're a bit tender on the beach before they fall asleep, and then he proposes to her at the very end of the film. And I wonder if that is because the actors actually didn't get along.
Yeah, maybe. Because
they didn't really
definitely
develop
didn't.
much of that friendship.
I got the sense, whether through the writing or not, that his impatience with the whole female thing was more along the lines of practicality. You know what I mean? Like not through any I'm dominant, you're not, I'm
malicious.
over you, whatever. There didn't seem to be much malicious. It was more like, well, how are you going to go to the toilet? You know, where are you going to sleep? Things like that. You know, because he's just the scientist. He's got the blinkers on. He just cares about the journey.
And he sees women in a certain way, that they will do certain things, need certain things.
Yep.
And he just can't see how that's going to work in his expedition.
Yep.
And then, as we see, she kind of surprises him.
And she wins in the end.
Yeah.
She wins him over and gets exactly what she wants. She doesn't remain a widow for long.
She seemed to have shrugged off the fact that she was recently widowed.
Yeah, she was a little quick out of that. A few
you
tears.
get the sense she probably didn't like the old professor that got knocked off.
Or
early on.
randles through the underworld with the murderer of her husband the entire time.
Yeah.
Maybe she had something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe.
Although she
we don't really know.
Although she does say that part of the reason for her giving the equipment to James Mason is to make up for her husband's ill deeds, because she didn't think that was right.
Mm-hmm. And she's the only
Trying to
one to
gazump.
speak Icelandic.
And, so there we go.
Cool.
So that's my take on The Lost Sofa.
Always great to share some time on the Lost Sofa with you, Rickers.
There is something going down, and I can
It's always good.
feel it.
The Lost Sofa.
We'll have full lyrics to this by next show.
Sofa, sofa, sofa.
There is something going down, and I can feel it.
So that brings us to our next segment. Tom Magill's going to show us just the tip.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Yeah, I'll reset it for you.
I've got the timer up there.
Oh, you have to.
Generally, I always just try to find interesting tidbits of trivia that the film can be said about the film. We've covered a few in the previous two segments when we talked about the lava being made of oatmeal. We talked about the dimetrodons being rhinoceros lizards that had sail fins glued to their backs and then presumably spray painted. We discussed conjecture about how many animals might have been harmed in this film.
How many got harmed just by having to get them to stand still long enough to get them to sit there?
He certainly filmed a lot of footage of
To put
lizards
the prosthetics
to
on-
put this
on
film
them.
together. Yeah,
Because I couldn't find any seams.
no, it was really
It
well,
was really well done. And we're talking about a live lizard.
and it
Granted,
held up.
maybe
during
they froze
movement.
them because don't lizards slow down when
Yes.
they're cold?
Yes,
Maybe they might have introduced
Yeah,
a little
put them in the
coldness
fridge.
and it slowed them down long enough to glue the shit on.
quite possible.
Well, the lava that they had was supposedly sort of red oatmeal to make it look like lava, but steam was coming out of it.
Yeah, I saw that.
So I
There's gotta be
imagine
dry
there
ice or
was
something.
dry ice mixed in with the lava oatmeal
Yeah.
that they're like pouring over
Same
these
trick
iguanas.
they used the year after when they did the Time Machine.
Okay.
It was just 1960, and they did the same thing there.
Is
they
that
have
a
lava.
Jules Verne as well?
No,
the
that's
Time Machine?
H.G. Wells.
Very along the same lines,
Which is
isn't it?
Jules Verne's arch enemy.
Arch enemy.
Oh, are they? They're sort of...
Well, yes, Jules Verne thought H.G. Wells was a bit of a hack.
oh,
It
that's
wasn't
interesting.
sciencey
There's a
enough.
show in that in itself, isn't
Frenchman and an Englishman at each other's throats. There.
Jeez, how
There's a first.
surprising.
there? Stay with us.
So, the film was nominated for 3 Oscars in 1959.
Yeah.
So, for Best Sound, nominated, but Ben-Hur won that one. And Best Special Effects, which I think the year after, or 2 years after, was renamed to the Best Visual Effects. But at the time, it was still called Best Special Effects Oscar.
Yep.
Nominated as well. And
And Tom, for the home, the people playing at home, difference today between special effects
today,
and visual effects?
the special effects and visual effects get very, very confused. Essentially, visual effects is
optical.
everything that you do to the footage.
It's
So
optical.
Once it's filmed,
Yeah.
you make changes to the image by digitally putting things in or color correcting it.
Compositing, that sort of
Anything
stuff.
you do to the film.
Special
after.
effects is physical.
On set, they put little squibs on characters to make the blood squirt out, or
Yep.
when they paint lizards or put the sails on lizards, and you put it on set and you film that. That's special effects. That happens on the day of shooting, whereas visual effects happen once the film has been developed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Best special effects at the year was also Ben-Hur, and then this one was also nominated for best art direction. Or some other sources said best set design. So I guess for the caverns and everything.
They shot a lot of it in caves, didn't
Some
they?
of it
In
was
California?
in Germany.
And in California, I think, as well.
Maybe. I know they definitely chose some caves in Germany to film in.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of it was on stage. You can see at some point when they're in the underground cave, when they're just about to leave,
Paper mache.
they scrub past some of the stalactites, some of the crystals, and just go.
You can see
that.
the actual strips of paper on some of the where they got a little bit slack.
But well
the
done.
Paper mache.
Well done. However, didn't get an Oscar because guess what? Ben-Hur won that as well. Ben-Hur destroyed that year. The 32nd Academy Awards, there were 25 categories and Ben-Hur got 11. That was a world record.
Wow.
First film to get 11 Academy Awards.
Didn't Around the World in 80 Days win Best Picture the year before?
I'm not sure what happened the year before.
It was either the 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea. That's a Disney movie, yeah?
Yep.
It's either that one
Also
or
with
James Mason.
James Mason,
in
that's
it,
right.
yeah.
One of the Jules Verne novels that were done preceding this film won Best Picture the year before.
Yeah.
Not sure which
Fair
one.
enough.
It was
I'm
one
not
of the
sure.
two.
But yeah, this one just couldn't get against. No film could stand against Ben-Hur that year. I think it just totally cleaned up. The one of the few things Ben-Hur didn't win was best musical and best short cartoon. For obvious reasons, but pretty much everything else.
Everything else.
11 out of 25 awards.
It was an
That's-
epic
that was
in the
immense.
truest
Yeah,
sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, sadly for this film, which deserved a few Oscars, I think, for its visuals, it was the wrong year for it to be nominated. Interestingly enough, the duck, there was 4 ducks. There was two
Am
two
I
ducks.
right in thinking this is award-winning duck?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it won a Gertrude the Duck won a
Patsy Award.
Patsy Award.
According to IMDb. Now, I looked
What did we learn about Patsy Awards last time? From the what?
from Orangey the
From
cat.
Orangey the cat.
Orangey the cat is the animal's equivalent of the Oscar.
That's right. Well, Gertrude won a Patsy.
Patsy
for
was
this role.
invented for the first horse that died. There was a horse that died on set for a film, and then they thought they should maybe nominate animals to get a special award. And so the Patsies were invented, and they ran until the mid-'80s. However, IMDb is the only place that claims that Gertrude won a duck. And I looked at the award list, and not a duck has ever won the Patsy Awards ever.
really?
Yeah, sadly, because I wanted to learn more about why Gertrude won the awards. And actually, the what
You
is it?
heard it here first. Just the tip. is
Correcting the
is
record.
Throwing shade on IMDb.
Well, IMDb
Citation
doesn't have,
needed.
Wikipedia has quotes. You have to put your citations in there. IMDb doesn't do that.
Okay.
So there's just the one sentence. Gertrude won the Patsy Awards. But Canniday.com, which keeps a list of all the animal winners, there's no mention of any duck ever winning the Patsy Awards, let alone in 1995.
Okay.
1959.
okay.
So I
Is there
say
a poultry-
shenanigans. I
Is
call
there an
shenanigans.
anti-poultry bias there?
Maybe. It could be. It could be.
Birds win it, but no ducks.
It's more mammals. That
That's
are-
foul.
Yeah.
Should have did that.
Do a thing.
Terrible. Faster.
Don't you have it?
Oh no, I do. Where is it?
Hey.
That's the one.
Better late than never.
You got to be really quick on that one.
I was asleep at the wheel.
So yeah, but two ducks for the film, and every
That's
duck
right.
on a,
Did
on
something
a set.
tragic happen to Duck
No,
version 1.0?
No, I just think they had one in Iceland and one in Hollywood.
Okay.
Because
Doesn't make sense
I'm
to
not sure.
take the duck over the
Over the
Atlantic.
ocean. No. They don't put
Okay.
horses on helicopters, and they don't take ducks over the water because it doesn't stick to them.
Did you get the impression that they painted the ring around the duck's eye?
This
Okay.
is not an eider duck. That's not what eider ducks look like. I wonder if they even take the trouble of painting one. Why don't they just paint one like the way an eider duck should look like, which has a black belly?
Okay.
Anyway, they painted a ring around the eye, and every animal on set needs to have a stand-in as well. I guess it's backup.
A stunt duck.
a stunt duck.
A
Yeah,
stunt duck.
a stand-in duck.
Because
Understand.
there was a couple of shots where Gertrude would fly gracefully to be caught by hands.
She always gets.
There's always seems to
Somebody-
be there's an arc. There's definitely
somebody
a
off
lob.
camera who just lobs that duck through the air, and then Hans sort of stretching her.
You can see Hans is
Kind of half not paying attention, and then, oh, fuck.
Hans, who was played by Peter Ronson, who's
right.
an actual Icelander.
He's got a funny story.
They actually speak the Icelandic that they speak in the film is actual. I'm not sure about Alena Dahl, how well her Icelandic is, but the Icelandic people who have seen the
If
film
she
say
didn't
this
know
actually makes sense.
Icelandic, she threw it really well.
Yeah.
She sort of, it felt like a person that knew the language. It didn't. Whereas I think Mason throughout the film tries to throw in a bit of French. I think when they're trying to translate the tapping from Gertrude on the other side of the wall, he's throwing in some French, and you can tell that's Richie Benno French. That's not Chateau de Flore.
Yeah. Parlez-vous.
But being the only Icelandic actor on the film, he's actually credited twice in the movie. He's credited
That's
as
right.
the actor for Hans
And the
then
technical
advisor. Yeah,
So
yeah,
what does that mean? He's like a mountaineer or
I guess he makes
climber?
sure that the Icelandic costumes are appropriate, which I hear they're not. They've been.
So he was studying in Southern California as a hurdler. He was an
He
Olympic.
hurdles.
He was an Olympic. He was in the Olympics.
That's why he's got such a good
as
body.
a hurdler, but he represented Iceland
Mm-hmm.
in hurdling in the Olympics, and that's why he's massive. He's a massive unit. He's
Mm-hmm.
a big guy with those big gangly legs, but he's proportionately large. He's not just skinny tall. He's actually broad and strong tall. You could tell that he'd probably squish you out. He'd probably have massive hands and block out the sun, sort of thing. He's
And
one of
just
these
to be
big
sure, this
humans.
is hurdling, not to be confused with hurtling, which is what they do with a duck a lot of times.
Yes, that's right. The duck hurtled.
The duck is hurdled. Other interesting actors are Alan Napier. He's the dean of the faculty who always runs around with his little sidekick, with his little boy wonder.
Absolutely.
What do we know Alan Napier from?
Well, it's funny that you should say Boy Wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm teasing you with the answer.
And you're also taking away a lot of the questions from my quiz later on, which I think is usually the way. He is famously the butler.
He's Alfred.
He's Alfred the butler from Batman.
Alfred,
From
the
the
butler
TV
from
show.
the
From
the
Batman
original
show.
TV
yeah.
Batman.
Yeah, the dean of the university, the tall guy.
Ah.
Just look at the things; he'll pop up any moment
Yeah,
now, and then
he's-
you'll.
I didn't totally didn't
recognize-
recognize.
That is
the butler.
Alfred. He's got the same mannerisms. He stands there like this. Just, yes, sir.
I recognised him in the film, and as soon as I looked up his name, sure enough, it was Alfred. Yeah, he's a very tall man.
Mm-hmm.
Although
Was that him?
Missed him.
No.
And then we also already talked about James Mason and Arlene Dahl not getting along very well. She was a bit of a diva on set.
Oh,
she
really?
didn't like getting wet and getting, being in the water. And at the end, when they're on the raft, when they get turned around in circles on the thing, she was just panicking.
And screaming, "Get me off this!" Apparently.
Yeah. And he shouted back, said, "Shut up, woman, or we'll have to do this take many more times. Shut up and get through it." And she fainted. And she fainted for 30 minutes. She was
really?
unconscious. Yeah.
So James Mason was right. Not taking a woman on this faint.
So there's that. We got the the Patsy Awards possibly not being true, and then the Oscars that it didn't win, and then we could also go into deep dive into all the science. We already mentioned the echolocation device that they take, when an echo hundred of times echoes around, then the last echo points.
I like how it had like this big sort of funnel on the end, like sort of a blunderbuss funnel.
That's right.
That would help somehow.
Yeah.
And the junction of the magnetic forces snatches gold away.
If it was only a few years later, it'd have like a little radar dish on there with a little point in the middle. But
We could use it in the on the grassy knoll in Dallas to work out where the shooter actually was.
Yeah.
Was he in the window? Was he over there on the grassy knoll behind the fence?
But it was
All
a
from
bit
that
weird.
one machine.
It was a bit weird that they only used that once and mentioned that
They
once
took
and
it.
then never
They
talked
took
about
it.
it
That's
ever
right.
again.
That's right. And they didn't give it a name. Did it have a name?
No, they have to ignore things. You have to just ignore the fact that there are that the caves are always impeccably lit.
Yeah.
That you're in underground and from all directions there's beautiful light. You have to ignore the fact that they're in there for 280 something days, 2/3 of a year, and they only have little backpacks and no food with them to ever last that long.
That's right.
Let alone the fact that they would get scurvy and whatever.
They'd starve in
they
a
would
fortnight.
die from just vitamin D deficiency.
Gertrude would have lasted
They
a
wouldn't
lot
get-
less.
Gertrude didn't have any minced meat to take. Yeah, dried meat to eat. So, yeah, you got to really suspend your disbelief with that story. There's Alfred over there.
Oh, yeah.
So,
All right, what other science did they have? I like these backpacks, and I was thinking
The breathing units.
those backpacks just reminded me of Ghostbusters.
Yes.
You know, they all
Yeah.
had those with the big cylinders. Very
But they're also very steampunk.
steampunk.
Yeah.
they?
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Brass.
Jules Verne, a lot of steampunk is inspired by
Yeah.
Jules Verne.
Yeah.
Although people say Jules Verne was the first steampunk, he wasn't steampunk, he was science fiction. But we've turned that aesthetic
Yep.
into steampunk.
Yeah, you see it a lot. You definitely a lot of those early 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea is also very steampunky, isn't it? Lots of dials and stuff like that, like physical dials.
Because it's basically, steampunk's basically looking at, it's a type of science fiction that's set in the steam era.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
and that's what these actually
Hoses
are.
and brass and yeah.
the Leidendorf apparatus was new at the time. That generates electricity without an open flame because you can't go underground. You don't know if there's gases that'll explode, so you cannot take open flame with you. Let alone how many open flames would you have to carry and to sustain you for the long.
So it was like a
journey.
wind-up generator,
wind-up
and,
generator,
and
yeah.
a battery-powered light.
I guess the wind up charges up the battery.
It's got a coil,
Yeah.
like the coil glows when it receives electricity.
And finally, Arne Sagnarsson survives usually, and he comes back to the surface, writes about his journey, writes notes that the professor finds in a book, with a code. One of the
The
interesting,
original
the original
Saknussemm
in
or
the
the
book.
Count?
In the book, because in this film they find the skeleton at the end.
Okay, yeah.
And that doesn't because the reason the professor knows about the Saknussemm journey is because Saknussemm made the journey. We already conjectured that he probably did it a few times in order to make his notches, but he made the journey and he came back and he wrote about it and in code. And the professor deciphers that code, and that's actually one of the interesting parts at the start of the book is the deciphering of that rune writing code, which is. I did the journey. It says, go to the Sneffelsjökull at the first day of June and see the Scartaris light and blah, blah, blah. It tells that, writes it in Latin, reverses it so it's written backwards, and then he takes every sixth letter and writes them vertically, and then he turns that into runes. and in the book, the professor sees that rune thing and he goes, I think. Well, he translates all the letters and he counts the letters and he goes, okay, there's this many E's and there's this many things, and this guy was a scientist, therefore this is Latin. Yeah. And then check out.
It's more about language.
He goes, there's this many columns, so obviously he took he just deciphers this thing on the go, first try.
Yeah.
He just goes the whole thing, and then he gets a sentences doesn't make sense because it's Latin backwards, and that's where he stumps. He doesn't figure that last bit out, that the thing is in reverse, and then spends hours and hours brooding over it and thinking that he did a mistake. So it's a very entertaining, memorable part of the book, and which they probably for film reasons couldn't really turn into a film.
Yeah, I nearly passed out just listening to you talk about it.
I think that actually has historical sort of precedence that I can't remember exactly, but I think scientific people from around about that era or a little bit before, when they came up with something that they thought was really smart, they'd write it in some bizarre code, post it to everybody, and then
to prove that they had the idea, but they can't prove the idea yet, so they have to make sure
they can't tell people
that's
the
right.
idea.
They have to make sure that they got their footprint in it, and so they would often put in they would often make anagrams.
Yeah.
So you would make you write the discovery in, and then you make an anagram of it. Except one scientist, his anagram was A B B B B B C C C D D F F H. So he just took all the letters, put them in alphabetical order, said, "There you go."
Sure, that means you've invented everything.
Most of them are a bit more inventive.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the interesting stuff that I could find about this film.
Very good.
Awesome. That's another episode of Just the Tip. Thank you, Tommy. As always, very informative and entertaining. Even though you've stolen a large portion of my material for what's coming up.
You can't make a trivia quiz just after I cover the trivia section.
Yeah, I know. I'm in trouble. Okay, that brings us to the end of another episode of Voyage of the Geek, our deep dive into Journey to the Center of the Earth, a 1959 sci-fi classic. Join us next time for our final episode of our 3-episode journey. Until then, it's bye for now.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
What is your destiny? How many of you are there?